Um, so today, when we use the internet, we do our online banking and checking our email through encrypted channels. When you talk to your bank, it's through an encrypted channel. When you check your email, the communication between your smartphone and your email server is typically through an encrypted channel. But it wasn't always that way. In the 1990s, we had to fight hard to get the governments of the world to allow us to use strong cryptography. Historically, cryptography has been a kind of a monopoly. The government control of cryptography was pervasive. There wasn't very good cryptography for the general public. In fact, it was because of what happened in World War II with the British and the Americans intercepting the communications of the Axis powers and decrypting it, like at Bletchley Park. And that was of great strategic importance. This gave governments the feeling that it was important to control access to strong cryptography, because strong cryptography would make it impossible to decrypt these messages, which were so important for winning the war. And so for all the decades after World War II, up until the 1990s, there was a lot of government control of cryptography. But I wanted to find a way to make it so that ordinary people could use cryptography. And so in 1991, I published software that encrypts email, called PGP, or Pretty Good Privacy. And I published it on the internet, and at that time, the US government had laws that prohibited the export of military technologies without a license from the State Department. There was a list of items that could not be exported, such as weapons, Stinger missiles, assault rifles, helicopter gunships, nuclear weapons, encryption software. And so on the munitions list was encryption software, and that means that my software, PGP, was prohibited from being exported without a license from the State Department. And I didn't ask them for a license, I just published it on the internet. And whenever you publish anything on the internet, it just goes everywhere. It just blows across national borders like dandelion seeds blowing in the wind. That's not how it is when you export real weapons. There are border controls, you can generally tell if somebody's exporting weapons. But not so with encryption software. So you publish it, and it just goes everywhere. And the government in the US held that this was a violation of the Arms Export Control Act. And so they started a 3-year criminal investigation, which kind of put me in the same class as arms exporters, as if I'd sold Stinger missiles to Gaddafi, But this actually had the unintended side effect of making my software more popular. And so for the entire 3 years, I did almost daily press interviews. It started by them, US Customs called me, and they asked me, they wanted to ask me a few questions about PGP, and they wanted to help understand what it is. And I thought, I guess they just probably wanted a little technical help. Maybe they encountered PGP in their work, and they wanted me to explain to them what it was. So I was talking on the phone to them. I lived in Colorado at the time. And then they said they wanted to come and see me, and they were based in San Jose, California. I was in Boulder, Colorado, and I thought, wait a minute, they're going to fly all the way here to interview me about PGP. That's when I began to suspect that this was not just that they needed a tutorial on encryption software. So I contacted a criminal defense lawyer and met with the customs officials, customs agents, and it became clear that I was the target of a criminal investigation. And so So for 3 years, I did almost daily press interviews. I did about 5 press interviews a week for 3 years. And this made PGP more popular. Wired magazine had an article about me in every single issue. It was either an article about PGP or about me or about the crypto struggle to get rid of the export controls. And it wasn't just export controls in the US, it was also domestic controls in France. Britain had a combination of export controls and domestic controls. And in fact, in the US, they were also trying to impose domestic controls. There were no domestic controls at that time, but the FBI was trying to, they built this chip called the Clipper chip, and they wanted to put that in everyone's telephone. And this Clipper chip would encrypt your phone calls. And every Clipper chip was manufactured by the government, and every Clipper chip had a unique cryptographic key in it, and the government kept a copy of that key in a vast government database for wiretap purposes. So that, yes, your phone call is encrypted, but the government can read it. They have a backdoor. That was in the 1990s. And they were surprised that this was not going well in the market. People didn't want to buy this chip, didn't want to buy any products that use this chip. So the Clipper chip was slapped down pretty hard by the market. So domestic controls never took off. In the meantime, we had to struggle all the way through the 90s to lift the export controls on encryption software. And PGP was kind of at the center of that controversy. And at the same time, there was a struggle in Europe, with similar controls in Europe. So throughout the 90s, the entire computer industry, civil liberties groups, privacy activists, the press, academic cryptographers, everybody was involved in the debate. And finally, we got, my investigation ended after 3 years. They decided not to indict me. And so I didn't go to prison. It would have been 41 months to 51 months in a federal prison, according to the mandatory sentencing guidelines. So that ended in 1996, and then I started a company, PGP Inc., to sell PGP commercially. I moved to California, and we started making it into a commercial product. Well, another thing that we did at that time during the criminal investigation was I noticed that there was an exception to the export controls on cryptography, that if you publish source code in a book, in a printed book, it was legal to export the book. So I talked with MIT Press, an academic press, at MIT, and arranged with them to publish a book with all the PGP source code in it. And then they were able to export it. But the idea there was that if I was indicted, that we would use this at trial as part of my defense. We wanted to put the government in a position that either they would try to suppress the export of this book, which would have raised First Amendment problems, or else they would allow the book to be exported, in which case that also would be helpful to us in my defense. And so we didn't have to go that far. We did publish the book through MIT Press, but since I wasn't indicted, I squeaked past that one. But anyway, so this started the crypto industry. By the end of the 90s, the suppression of the export of American encryption software generated an encryption industry in Europe. And so the problem got worse. I mean, their attempts to control cryptography resulted in the proliferation of more cryptography. They don't always get what they want. Now, we noticed that as the debate unfolded, that it was a near consensus that that the whole of American society was in agreement that we needed to get rid of the export controls. The one holdout was the FBI, who fought it to the bitter end. But we noticed that the NSA withdrew from the debate. They stopped opposing, and I did a lot of public speaking at the time, and I did a lot of debates. I debated the FBI a few times. I debated the NSA a few times. But the NSA withdrew from the debate, and they stopped trying to control cryptography. And so we won, or so we thought. But what we've seen in recent years, after cryptography became a pervasive part of our technology infrastructure, Edward Snowden, not so long ago, a few years ago, released a whole bunch of NSA documents that showed us that it really wasn't that much of a problem for the NSA that cryptography became pervasive. Because, let me give you a broader context here. For centuries, there's been an arms race between cryptographers who make these encryption algorithms and cryptanalysts who break these encryption algorithms. So this arms race has been going on for centuries. And in the past 50 years, the very best encryption algorithms have become better than the very best cryptanalytic algorithms. And so the cryptographers pulled ahead in that arms race, and they've stayed ahead for the past 50 years. What's happened, though, is that there is another different arms race about another aspect of cybersecurity, and that is, how do you keep people from breaking into your computer? It is not purely a cryptography problem. It's also a matter of firewalls and intrusion detection and people hacking in and getting control of your computer. Because if they can hack in and get control of your computer and make your computer run carefully designed malware, then they control your computer. And if they control your computer, it doesn't matter how good your encryption software is. Because they can, for example, if they control your computer, they can have your computer exfiltrate cryptographic keys, or maybe even capture your keystrokes. They can put a keyboard logger in so that when you type in your password, it records every keystroke. So even if you have really good crypto, they know your keys. So that arms race, unfortunately, is tilted in favor of the attacker. So in the crypto world, cryptographers, they love to put their opponents in a position where they have to solve some difficult math problem. I mean, modern cryptographic algorithms are so good that, if somebody were to try to break it with cryptanalytic techniques, or maybe even exhausting all the keys, it takes longer than the age of the universe to do that. And that's a wonderful place to be if you're a cryptographer. You take great satisfaction in knowing that you've put your opponent in a position where they have to use all the computers in the world until God dies to figure out how to break your crypto. But unfortunately, that's not the only way to solve the problem. It's like, imagine if you put a steel door on your house, and the steel door is like half a meter thick, and you're wondering whether half a meter is enough. Maybe you should make it 1 meter thick of solid steel. Well, if somebody wants to break into your house, they're not going to drill a hole through the half a meter or 1 meter of solid steel. Instead, they're going to smash the window next to the door. They're going to reach in and turn the doorknob from the inside and open the door that way. And that is what the NSA is doing right now. And that's what other intelligence agencies are doing. That's what the Chinese are doing. That's what the Russians are doing. That's what the North Koreans did to Sony. There's other ways to get in. And so, there was a quote by some intelligence official, I think it was an American intelligence official, who said that if if data security was a football game, the score would be 310 to 375 in the first 20 minutes of the game, because it's all offense and no defense. Breaking into computer networks is so easy for nation states now. And so they've taken what we thought was a math problem and turned it into an engineering problem. And when you throw, the NSA has like 30,000 mathematicians, scientists, and engineers working for them full time on breaking into your computer, that they win. So that's why the NSA backed off in the 90s. That's why we were able to win the crypto revolution in the 90s. They just decided that they would let us win because they'd get us in a different way. And Snowden's revelations revealed that. And by the way, Snowden's documents reveal that which products the NSA was able to break into. And I'm very pleased to say that conspicuously absent from that list was anything I ever worked on. So for the past decade, I've been working, a little more than a decade, the last maybe 12 years, I've been working on secure telephony. I got pretty well known for my work in secure email with PGP, but I really have been more interested in secure phone calls. In fact, even before PGP, I wanted to work on secure phone calls, but it wasn't really feasible to do work on secure telephony because internet telephony back in the 90s wasn't really feasible in the early 90s because no one had broadband. And if you don't have broadband, you can't do any telephony, encrypted or not, you can't do any telephony on the internet unless you can't call anyone. No one has broadband. So the first internet telephony product I did was PGP phone in 1995, but it was too early because nobody used the internet to carry phone calls. So I had to wait. And after 9/11, broadband started to become available, but I thought maybe I'll delay a little bit because I figured the government had their hands full fighting Islamic extremists, and maybe I would just do consulting work for a while and give it a rest. I decided not to pursue internet telephony from the mid-90s because of the lack of infrastructure to carry internet telephony. And so I happened to find myself in a conversation with somebody who had helped write the U.S. Patriot Act, which is a bit of legislation in the U.S. that passed after 9/11. And it was a terrible undermining of privacy and civil liberties in the U.S. as it was a response to 9/11. And it provided the legal framework for the sharp escalation of domestic surveillance in the U.S. And this guy, his name was Viet Din, and he was giving a talk on the Patriot Act. And I raised my hand and I asked him, why did the Justice Department provide seminars to their prosecutors on how to use the Patriot Act to prosecute all kinds of crimes? And he said, well, crime is crime, and prosecutors should have all the tools that they need to prosecute crime. And I said, but wait a minute, I thought the Patriot Act was a kind of social contract between the US Congress and the US government and the American people, that the Patriot Act was designed to protect us from Al-Qaeda. And he said, no, that's not the way it is. We already had drafted the Patriot Act before 9/11, and we've been waiting for years for the opportunity, the political opportunity, to pass the Patriot Act. 9/11 gave us that window of opportunity, and we seized it. Now, this is one of the primary authors of the Patriot Act. And I wasn't picking this up in an internet chat room. This was not a rumor I mean, many people had kind of suspected this was the case. This is straight from the horse's mouth. This guy wrote it, or at least wrote a good part of it. And he was telling me to my face that this is what they did. And I thought, wow, I got to start right now on secure internet telephony. So for the past 12 years, I've been working on secure internet telephony. And now I have a company called Silent Circle. We do secure telephony mostly. And so if you need to whisper in someone's ear from 1,000 miles away, I can help you with that. Over thousands of years, human beings did whisper in each other's ears without the fear of anyone listening to them, because without communications technology, before electronics and telephony came along, every conversation you had with anyone was secure. If there was anybody standing nearby that could overhear your conversation, you could just walk over there and have it over there. Go out behind the barn and talk behind the barn. You can have a private conversation anytime you want. That's how humans evolved. That's our social expectation over centuries, over thousands of years. And then with the invention of electronic communications, the telegraph, the telephone, radio communications, all this changed when it became possible for your communications to be intercepted. And so I've always felt that we should be able to whisper in someone's ear even if their ear is 1,000 miles away. And so I've kind of built my career around trying to build the technology to make that possible. And I do all my phone calls today over a secure channel. A few years ago, about 4 years ago, I got, a little over 4 years ago, I got a call from a guy who was a Navy SEAL, and he wanted to start a company to build a way for American military people to call their families when they're overseas. And they're not allowed to use Skype. The Pentagon tells them that they're not allowed to use Skype, or they're not allowed to use this or that, but it wasn't giving them any solutions for how to talk to their families. He wanted to make a tool that would allow them to talk to their families when they're in theater, when they're deployed. And so I said, yeah, I could help you with that. So we started Silent Circle. And so today, all of his friends, Navy SEALs, and many other military people do use it, but also a lot of companies use it. And so anyway, that's what I do. And in the last year in particular, we've kind of pivoted the product mostly to enterprise customers, because enterprise customers actually are willing to pay for it, and individual users not so much. That was a problem that we had with PGP. When I first published PGP, I gave it away for free. And the problem with free encryption software is that you can get a lot of people to download it, but it's hard to get them to pay anything. So they'll say, give me liberty or give me death, but don't ask me to pay $50. So selling to enterprise seems to be the way to make money at it. That's not always the case. I mean, WhatsApp just recently provided secure end-to-end messaging for 1 billion people, and they don't have a way to monetize it yet, but I'm sure with 1 billion users, they'll find a way to monetize that. I was told that I would have the opportunity to get an interactive Q&A going here. Can somebody tell me how much time I have left? I haven't been keeping track of the time. 10 minutes? We could do some Q&A here if anybody wants to. I'd like to get a little bit of a conversation going.
Yeah, good.
So,
yeah.
Do you have any examples of information, I guess we're going to call it the government, whether it's the UK, US, has gathered through these measures that was used improperly?
Yeah. Well, Well, first of all, I'd like to say the question about whether it's used improperly, at least in the US, it was not supposed to be gathered at all. Domestic surveillance by the NSA on the American population was illegal. And so it's not so much whether they used it improperly, they shouldn't have gathered it at all. It was the act of gathering it. The interceptions were illegal. When the NSA was created, the deal was that it would be a foreign intelligence agency and not turn against the domestic public. Now, the reason why I make such a distinction about domestic surveillance for intelligence agency is that I understand that there's a lot of people from a lot of countries here, and if you look at dystopian societies like 1984, one thing they have in common is they have a heavy domestic surveillance. One of my favorite films is the German film Das Leben der Anderen, which is The Lives of Others, and it's about life under the Stasi and how pervasive the surveillance was under the Stasi. See, it would bother me to think that a foreign intelligence agency was spying on me. If North Korea were spying on me, I wouldn't like it. But they can't arrest me. I don't live in North Korea. It does bother me if my own government is spying on me. And whichever country you happen to live in, if your own government is spying on you, then you have a problem. That also interferes with the machinery of democracy. It means that the incumbent can spy on political opposition. Political opposition in China is nearly impossible because of the pervasive surveillance. Once that surveillance becomes an entrenched part of the technology infrastructure of a country, and the sitting government controls it, all it takes is a bad government to come into power, and then you can't have any more elections after that. Or if you have elections, it's hard for any opposition to run in those elections. Yeah, you.
Thank you. So you just pointed out that hacking is happening all the time, and we read it in the news. It's hard to protect the data. Any advice for our industry? We're moving people all over the world, collecting a lot of data on them as we move them. Any suggestions as to what we can do to protect ourselves against hacking?
One thing I would recommend is that whenever you do web browsing, that you do it with SSL, or it's called TLS also. It's the HTTPS, with the little lock, the padlock. Whenever you do online banking or you do e-commerce, you order something from Amazon, there's a little padlock while you type in your credit card information. Well, it used to be that only at certain times when you would be using that protocol, like when you're typing in your credit card details. But now there's a big movement, in part because of the Snowden revelations, that this connection between your web browser and website should become pervasive, so that every aspect of web browsing should use this protocol. And you should, if you're operating a business that has your customers typing in their information, it should be done through this protocol. You should also not open emails to you that, if there's a PDF file or something that's sent to you and you don't know exactly where it came from, you shouldn't open it. Some years ago, I got a call from somebody in the Indian government who wanted me to help. There was something about the Dalai Lama had opened a PDF file that was put in his email by the Chinese government. It took control of his computer, seized control of the webcam and the microphone, and was able to listen to all the conversations and observe the conversations in his office. So don't take candy from strangers. Try to use SSL all the time when you talk to every website you visit. Try to use encrypted email. There's PGP and things similar to PGP, GNU Privacy Guard. There's something called proton mail. You know, you could use encrypted email. There's another thing is that you walk around with a laptop computer, you should encrypt the whole disk drive. If you have, like for example, if you use Mac OS, there's a setting you can turn on whole disk encryption so that if you leave your laptop in a taxi, then if somebody gets their hands on that laptop, they can't read it without the passphrase. And also, I'd recommend that instead of using a password, which is typically a word that you would find in a dictionary, there's dictionary attacks that they can do where they try all the words in the dictionary to see if they can find your password. If you use a passphrase instead of a password, then it's less likely to appear in a dictionary. There's also, if you have servers, then you need to hire somebody to help you protect your servers. It's not some advice that I can give while standing on one foot on stage. You need a security professional to help protect your servers, because servers are they're on all the time. There's kind of sitting ducks, then they get attacked. The attackers are getting more and more formidable. If a nation state wants to get into your server, then probably you're not going to be able to stop them. But the kind of work that you do, you're not likely to encounter a nation state trying to get into your server. But I don't know. I mean, it depends on what kind of clients you have. I live in Geneva, and the UN has a headquarters there, so maybe relocation consultants need to provide relocation assistance for diplomats, in which case maybe that would be of some interest to nation states. Now, let's not see always the same hands every time. Yes?
You can repeat this, right? I'd just be curious your thoughts on the Apple FBI situation.
Yes. I agree with Apple completely. What the FBI is trying to do is not about just that one phone. It's about trying to establish a legal precedence so that they can get into any phone. And if Apple cooperates with them on that, it's a big mistake. Tim Cook realizes that everything is about setting a legal precedent. And the law is kind of like, imagine a brick structure, a brick wall maybe. And every brick gets laid down on all the other bricks that came before it, all the other cases, all the other laws that came before. And so it's all about legal precedents. So it builds up this brick structure, brick by brick. And every brick you lay down is the foundation for the next layer of bricks. And so it's not about one phone. That's like if you're playing chess, you don't say this chess move is not about any future chess moves. Well, yes, it is. Every chess move you make is about future chess moves. If we allow a backdoor, it's not only the FBI that would be able to get in, it's also China would be able to get in. China has asked Apple for help, and Apple said no. Well, if Apple says yes to the FBI, it's going to be harder to say no to China. Nation states want access to all of our smartphones. If you make a backdoor for nation states, you're making a backdoor also for organized crime. You can't just make a backdoor just for the FBI. Some years ago, there was a confrontation between Google and the Chinese government because Google had put in a backdoor for law enforcement for accessing their servers. And the Chinese government hijacked that backdoor, and they used it to spy on Chinese dissidents. And then Google found out about it, and that triggered this confrontation. You can't make a backdoor just for the good guys. A backdoor is a backdoor, About 100 years ago, the American bank robbers, Bonnie and Clyde, revolutionized how banks got robbed. They were the first ones to use the automobile so effectively. They would rob a bank, jump in their car, and drive very fast across state lines so the police couldn't chase after them. And the police had never seen bank robbers do that before. They were frustrated by this shocking tactic that Bonnie and Clyde used. And so they were calling for car companies to build smaller fuel tanks on cars. Clyde Barrow wrote a letter to Henry Ford thanking him for designing such a fine automobile and telling him how important his automobile was in helping him rob banks. Every technology that we make, if we allow society as a whole to benefit from this technology, bad guys are going to benefit from it too. I've tried to think of a way to make something that only good guys could use, but as much as I rack my brains, and it's not just me, it's all the other cryptographers in the business, we've all tried to think of something and we can't come up with anything. And that's because there isn't a way to do it, in my opinion. If you make it available, if you put a backdoor in, I mean, look, my stuff is used by Navy SEALs to kill the terrorist that the FBI wants to catch. If you put a backdoor in, the Navy SEALs don't want to use it. I think the FBI is only looking at it from their point of view. They're only looking at it, they have this kind of narrow job, and they want their narrow job to be easier. But they're making it hard for everyone else, including the Navy SEALs that are trying to kill the Islamic extremists that are going to go, shoot up Americans in California, So, yeah, I understand why law enforcement wants this. But law enforcement now lives in a golden age of surveillance. If you go back to the 1990s, they didn't have as much pervasive access to everything that they have today. After 9/11, the American government tried to create something called total information awareness, and it was a fusion of data from all these different surveillance sources. And they created a logo for this, the Total Information Awareness Office, and it was a pyramid with an eye at the apex of the pyramid, and it was looking down on the earth. And it had in Latin around the outer part of the circle, knowledge is power. And, I have to congratulate them on making such a logo, because it made it clear to everyone that this was not what we wanted, right? So the Total Information Awareness Project was shut down. Unfortunately, the techniques that they were putting together into that got redistributed to other parts of the intelligence apparatus. And in fact, we do have that fusion. That's what the NSA has done. And that's what the Snowden revelations indicate. We're in a pickle. We've gotten ourselves into a difficult situation. In our zeal, in our reaction to the 9/11 attacks, we have created self-inflicted wounds that exceed the wounds of the attack. The number of lives lost in the Iraq War, the number of the amount of money that we've spent, and most importantly, the effect on our civil liberties, the use of torture, the creation of a pervasive surveillance society. All this has come at a cost that exceeds the damage of the attacks. We have to push back, and Apple is good. It's good that Apple's pushing back against the FBI. If we want to create a future where we move our lives, from talking to people out behind the barn to have a private conversation, we move our lives into a digital environment where almost all of our social communications is happening through the internet. And we have our smartphones that has everything about our lives in it, tracking our every movement and having our emails held and instant messages. Our whole lives are stored in this massive amount of storage in a smartphone, and all the communications channels. These are all accessible to the, to the FBI and to the NSA and to GCHQ and to the Russian FSB and the Chinese. We have to push back on all these things. We can't allow the elimination of our private selves in the name of, eliminating one dark pixel from the big picture that they now have. They have the ability to see everything from all these different surveillance sources. They can do monitoring of our travel records. The traffic cameras can do optical character recognition of our license plates. They can recognize human faces and identify people. Surveillance cameras in Britain, there's millions of surveillance cameras in Britain, and they do face recognition. That means that they can see where everybody goes. And then they put this all together, fusing it into a comprehensive total information awareness picture. That's, in my opinion, too high a price. And when the FBI or GCHQ says that it's intolerable to have encryption without a backdoor for the government, they're complaining about a single dark pixel in the big picture that they now enjoy. Well, would they want to trade places with their former selves from 20 years ago, where they didn't even have that kind of big picture? They're living in a golden age of surveillance. Please let us have a couple of little pixels to ourselves. Anyway, I think I'm out of time.
That's it. Fantastic. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Phil.